Every time a woman tests you, she's asking one specific question, and most men answer it wrong. I need to tell you something most women would never admit out loud. We test. All of us. Not to manipulate you, not to play games, but because words are cheap and behavior is the only currency that actually tells us the truth about a person. A man can say he's confident. A man can say he won't be controlled. A man can say he respects himself, saying it costs nothing. What we're actually watching for is what happens when those words are tested by something real. A little pressure, a little provocation, a moment where the easy thing to do is fold. Today, as a woman, I'm going to show you exactly what we're testing for, why we do it, and precisely how to pass every single test you'll ever face. By the end of this video, you'll never be caught off guard by one again. I want to tell you about a man named Tobias. Tobias was on his third date with a woman named Naomi. Things had been going well, good conversation, real chemistry, the kind of evening that makes you start imagining what comes next. And then, about halfway through dinner, Naomi said something completely unprompted. "You know," she said, stirring her drink, not quite looking at him, "I've heard guys like you always end up ghosting after the third date." Tobias felt his stomach drop. He immediately started explaining himself. No, I'm not like that at all. I really like spending time with you. I would never just disappear, that's not who I am. I actually—" He kept going for almost a full minute, reassuring her, defending himself against an accusation that hadn't really been made. By the time he finished, something in Naomi's expression had shifted, subtle but real. She smiled, said something polite, and the rest of the date felt slightly different, slightly flatter. Tobias walked away from that date convinced he'd done everything right. He'd been honest. He'd reassured her. He'd communicated his intentions clearly. He texted her the next day. She replied, politely, briefly, and then the conversation slowly faded over the following week. Tobias never understood what happened. What Tobias didn't know, what almost no man is ever taught, is that Naomi's comment wasn't really about ghosting at all. It was a test. And the way he responded told her something he never meant to communicate. Let me explain what was actually happening in that moment, and why this pattern shows up so consistently in early dating and relationships. In evolutionary psychology, there's a well-documented concept around what's sometimes called fitness testing. The idea that throughout human history, women have needed reliable ways to assess a potential partner's psychological stability, resourcefulness, and capacity to handle pressure, often within a very short window of interaction. Words are free, behavior under pressure is not. Here's the core problem testing solves. Anyone can present well. Anyone can say the right things on a first date, in a text message, in the early excited weeks of getting to know someone. Self-presentation is cheap and easy to fake, consciously or not. What's much harder to fake is how someone responds when something unexpected, slightly uncomfortable, or mildly provocative is introduced into the interaction. So, largely without conscious intention, women introduce small moments of friction. A teasing comment, a slight challenge, an accusation that isn't quite serious. And then we watch. Not because we're cruel, not because we enjoy watching men squirm, but because that moment of friction reveals something real that conversation alone cannot. The test isn't cruelty, it's due diligence. Naomi's comment wasn't really an accusation she believed, it was a probe. She was watching to see whether Tobias would stay grounded, perhaps respond with some light humor or calm reassurance without over-explaining, or whether he would scramble, over-justify, and reveal that her opinion of him had enough power to destabilize him completely. And here's the part that matters most. When Tobias spent almost a full minute defending himself, reassuring her, explaining his intentions in detail, he answered a different question than the one she was actually asking. She wasn't really asking, "Will you ghost me?" She was asking, "Can a slightly uncomfortable moment shake you?" And his answer, through his behavior rather than his words, was, "Yes, easily." She doesn't remember what you said, she remembers how you handled it. This is the part I really need you to internalize. A woman is rarely consciously tracking the content of what you say in these moments. She is tracking your emotional state while you say it. Composed and amused, that registers as security. Anxious and over-explaining, that registers as instability, even if every word coming out of your mouth is true and reasonable. I want to give you a second version of this story because I think watching the contrast in real time is more powerful than any explanation. A friend of mine, Yara, told me about two men she dated around the same period in her life, and the way each of them handled almost the exact same moment. The first man, she'd been seeing for about 3 weeks. One evening, half joking, she said, "I bet you say this exact same thing to every girl you talk to." He went quiet for a second. Then he said, somewhat defensively, "No, that's really not fair. I don't even talk to other people right now. I've been completely focused on this." And he kept going, listing reasons, trying to convince her. Yara told me she felt herself pull back almost immediately, not because she actually thought he was lying, but because the speed and intensity of his defensiveness told her something about how easily he could be destabilized by her opinion of him. Defensiveness reveals what defense is trying to hide. The second man, call him Daniel, she said something almost identical to. A light, teasing comment about whether he had a whole rotation going. Daniel just laughed, a real laugh, and said, "Wow, should I be offended, or is that actually kind of a compliment?" That was it. He didn't defend himself. He didn't list reasons. He took the comment, found it slightly amusing, and tossed it right back to her without an ounce of anxiety in his voice. Yara told me that moment, that small, completely inconsequential exchange, did more for her attraction to Daniel than almost anything he'd said on their actual dates. He wasn't trying to pass, he just wasn't shaken. Here's what I want you to notice in both of these stories. Neither Tobias nor the first man with Yara did anything wrong in terms of their character. They were both, by every account, genuinely good, genuinely interested men. Their failure wasn't a character failure, it was a reactivity failure. They let a small moment of social pressure take control of their emotional state. And that loss of composure, however brief, communicated something neither of them intended to communicate. Daniel wasn't smarter or more emotionally intelligent in some abstract sense. He had simply, somewhere along the way, developed the capacity to receive a slightly provocative comment without his nervous system treating it as a threat. That capacity, more than anything else I could teach you today, is what separates men who pass these tests from men who don't. Now let me give you the actual framework. There are 3 primary types of tests you'll encounter, and a specific way to think about passing each one. The first is the emotional stability test. This is exactly what happened with Tobias and with Yara's first man. She says something slightly provocative, teasing, or mildly accusatory, not because she believes it, but because she wants to see your emotional reaction to social pressure. The test fails when you become defensive, over-explain, or treat the comment with more seriousness than it deserves. The test passes when you respond with light humor, calm amusement, or simply don't take the bait at all. A simple way to think about this: she has thrown you a small wave. The test isn't whether you can avoid the wave, it's whether you can stay standing while it passes over you. Practical response options: agree and exaggerate, respond with amused disbelief, or simply smile and change the subject entirely. All 3 communicate the same underlying message. Your opinion of me, even when slightly critical, does not destabilize me. The second is the attention test. This one is quieter and shows up most often after the early excitement of a connection has settled. She pulls back slightly, replies a little slower, initiates a little less, seems a touch more distant than usual, and watches what you do. The test fails when you immediately increase your effort to compensate. More messages, check-ins, visible anxiety about the change. The test passes when you notice the shift, don't panic, and continue showing up as the same grounded version of yourself, neither chasing nor punishing her with matching coldness. This test is smaller, more deliberate, and often happens early. She is specifically checking whether your interest in her requires her constant validation to sustain itself. A man who can hold steady through a brief reduction in her attention demonstrates something words cannot: that his sense of self isn't outsourced to her behavior. The third is the consistency test, and this one plays out over weeks or months, not minutes. She is watching whether the man she met initially is the same man who shows up over time. Does his warmth fluctuate with his mood? Does his stated standards hold when they become inconvenient? Does he treat people around him the same way he treats her? This test fails slowly, through small inconsistencies that accumulate. It passes through unremarkable, repeated reliability, being essentially the same person in March as you were in January. This is the test that matters most for anything long-term, and it's the one that can't be gamed. It can only be passed by genuinely being a stable, congruent person. Here's the unifying principle across all three. In every single case, what she's actually testing is the same underlying thing. Is there a real, stable person here? Or does this man's sense of self depend on my approval to hold together? The question is always the same. Only the disguise changes. Pass all three, and you've demonstrated something that no amount of charm, wealth, or physical attractiveness can substitute for: genuine internal security. Before I close, I need to address three important things, because this knowledge, like anything powerful, can be misapplied. Mistake 1. Trying to perform unshakability instead of actually being grounded. Some men hear this advice and start performing a kind of forced coolness, never reacting to anything, treating every comment with theatrical indifference. Women notice this immediately. Performed calm is just another costume. What I'm describing is not an absence of reaction, it's the absence of anxious reaction. You can absolutely be warm, expressive, and emotionally present while still being grounded under light pressure. Mistake 2. Treating every comment as a test that needs to be passed. Not everything a woman says is a deliberate probe. Sometimes a comment is just a comment. If you start approaching every interaction like a chess match, you will come across as calculating and emotionally distant. The vast majority of conversation should simply be genuine connection. Trust that you'll recognize testing moments without needing to overanalyze every sentence. Mistake 3. Confusing genuine red flags with normal testing behavior. I want to be very clear about this because it matters enormously. Light teasing, brief withdrawal, watching how you handle minor social pressure, these are normal, healthy aspects of how attraction and trust get built. Testing builds trust. Manipulation erodes it. Repeated, escalating attempts to provoke jealousy, ongoing disrespect disguised as just testing you, or behavior that consistently leaves you feeling anxious or small, that is not testing. That is a different and much more serious issue. Healthy testing is occasional and resolves into deeper trust. Unhealthy patterns repeat indefinitely and never resolve into safety. Tobias never found out what that comment from Naomi was really about. He walked away from that date believing he'd done everything right, and in some ways he had. He was honest. He was kind. He genuinely liked her. But in that one small moment, when she handed him a little bit of pressure to see what would happen, he showed her something he never meant to show her. That her words, even playful ones, had the power to destabilize him completely. Daniel, in that almost identical moment with Yara, showed her something completely different. Not through anything he said about himself, just through how he held a single comment without flinching. She isn't testing whether you're perfect, she's testing whether you're real. I want you to understand something before you go. These tests are not obstacles standing between you and connection. They are, in their own strange way, an act of care. A woman who tests you is a woman who is taking the relationship seriously enough to find out what's actually underneath the surface before she invests more of herself in finding out the hard way. The men who pass these tests aren't the most impressive men in the room. They're the most settled. Drop a comment below. Tell me about a moment where you think you were being tested and how you responded. I read everything, and I want to know your story. And if this video gave you something real, subscribe. Every single week I come back here with something most women would never say out loud, but I will. Next time, we're going into one of the most important topics on this channel: why women stop respecting certain men, and the quiet, almost invisible behaviors that cause it. It happens slowly, Most men don't notice the shift until it's already happened. That one matters. I'll see you then.